I sort of, in a way, don't like playing with player colors just because, you know, I've got preset blue and red. So Kira's starting out as Norse, orange, represented with the blue score. A little time to find that storehouse initially, but it's going to go for double storehouse here. Quite a greedy opening in a way, but Neenja's going to go for a storehouse on the food without really gathering any earlier wood, so he's likely to do double storehouse as well, which means neither of our players is going to field the earliest of spear rush timings here. It is also going to give him a slightly quicker age up, so we're likely to see a quick second town center and a skipping of early game spearmen just to focus on counter infantry production. So Norse have got the really versatile throwing axemen, legionaries for the Romans, also quite versatile. They've got a lot of pierce armor and a good base health pool, so for a counter infantry unit they're actually really good at shoving under enemy town centers, trying to force villagers off resources or even get outright villager kills. You know, it's ultimately what you want to do in a strategy game, because assuming you and your opponent are equal in terms of your ability to actually produce stuff and, you know, have macro mechanics, ultimately what you want to try and do is go for a build that lets you be as greedy as your opponent, while also giving you a slight upper hand in terms of being able to take outright fights or just, you know, deny resource gathering and get villager kills. Our players unlikely to miss any early game villager production here. We'll even be preemptively going for a house around the time they age up. So it's not too dissimilar to playing the early game in pretty much any of the other AoEs. In fact, it used to just be a little bit faster than all the others, because these gather rates used to actually be 20%. Well, they've lost 20% of their gather rate. Your base rate was 1.0 resources per second, and units are about the same sort of costs as they are in the other AoEs. But all infantry and all ranged in the early game are one population as well, so you tend to spam quite a good number of units. And yeah, with the fairly quick gathering, it tended to mean a bit more of a spammy mid to late game than the other games in the series, particularly AoE 2 and AOM, where you've got to be quite careful to not overextend and lose too many units, and, you know, be forced into early to mid game military production that you otherwise could have just skipped and gone to late game military production on. You know, AoE up until that resource gather rate nerf really sort of rewarded playing as swarmy in the early to mid game as you could. Try and take map control, starve your opponent out of resources. It hasn't changed hugely in terms of the actual meta game, other than the fact that people are just a bit more hesitant to throw away armies to actually take fights out in the middle of the map constantly, or try and go for raid and defend situations, you know, sniping villages but losing cavalry. Nowadays they're probably more inclined to try and keep that cavalry, just sort of force their opponent out of position to cover for the villagers, and then just back off and try and tech. So Neenja gonna try and get his HQ town center. Kire, similar spot, he's got the stone he needs, just gonna keep gathering a bit more food and get 400 wood. And they'll also, yeah, slightly up their food gatherer count from here, because they'll be wanting to make sure they can maintain double town center villager production. This is a good spot for our players, because they'll be going for a house now. I can actually fit one more villager in here, so he's going to do so, but he might miss out on a little bit of villager production time here, because he's going to take a bit to actually get this town center up. Neenja, on the other hand, houses are only 50 wood for him. They only cover 5 population, but it's a much smaller commitment, and he's got the engineer to build. And Kire playing Norse, long houses, cover 10 pop, They cost twice as much. They've got a bit more health, and you can actually garrison villages in and out of them. But yeah, it's going to cut into Kire's villager production at the moment. He's on 18 vills to Neenja's 19. Town center's slightly faster though, so it might end up offsetting that realistically. So we'll only end up one villager down now. But bearing in mind, Norse, they start with 2 scouts, while the other civs only start with 1, so you need to actually have that first house slightly earlier than the other civs, because otherwise you're going to be pop capped, which we saw Kire get there. He actually threw away that melee scout there, but he possibly could have done that before this town centre finished up, just to maintain villager production out of this first town centre, and just rely on 1 scout. But ideally you probably actually want to sacrifice the ranged scout, because you can use your melee scout to build a barracks. Your ranged scout can build outposts, but they can only make war dogs, whereas your melee scout, if you build the barracks, he can produce infantry that can build any military building. So, and on top of that, you know, they've got a wider spread of things that you can actually counter. War dogs really only good for snaring cavalry and sort of denying raids, but even with that, you've often got to commit just as many resources. You don't sacrifice population to have war dogs. Makes them quite a nice unit for that, but they'll still eat into your early food eco. Here it's going double barracks. Have another longhouse now as well. Neenja. Actually going for Praetorium here before a Castellum, so these are your barracks equivalent. In fact, he's going, I mean, these are your stables equivalent, while Castellum's your barracks equivalent. So he's actually making Decurions. They're what's called officer units. So there is a build limit on these. I think it's only 8 in the in age 2 until you actually get your Roma Invicta in age 4, which increases all of these by 50 or 100% in terms of your build capacities, except for the Primus. So Romans have got all these, yeah, officer units. They're a bit like semi-hero units. So they still are fairly normal in terms of the counter system, like these guys. Cavalry, for instance. Centurion's infantry, Aquilifa's infantry, Primus is cavalry, I think. Or maybe Primus is no tag, sorry. They might actually be no tag, because I think the chief for a long time had no tag as well, and I think these days he counts as infantry. So the chief is like a Norse hero unit in the late game that increases other infantry health. These guys, a little bit slower than regular cavalry, but a little bit beefier. Quite expensive on the stats. They do have health regen as well, which health regen on units is something really only Babylonians get, because they're sort of like a swarmy civ, a bit like Zerg. So Decurion's going to be quite nice against Kire's villagers. He's going to be able to, Ninja's going to be able to snipe a couple of vills here. He's on 41 to 38, denying a little bit of gathering as well, which is also important because it just means Kire's going to be a bit slower on his military production. Going for 3 barracks. He's got throwing axemen, but these guys are honestly useless against Decurions. So he's having to produce spears out of 3 barracks, which is quite nice because he's going to have enough to kill the Decurions pretty soon, and on top of that he can just switch back to throwing axemen production, adding a 4th barracks as well now, while we've got a forum for Ninja. So this will allow for a reduced villager build time upgrade, quite handy to use. Ninja denying some gathering here, so he's managing to deal quite a bit of damage to Kire at the moment. 42 villagers to 47. Ninja's opening up a little gap, also denying a bit of gathering time, building time. So Kire's actually starting to use a bit more military building now, which he possibly could have used a bit more of earlier, but at the same time it's also handy to have spears around your base in this sort of position, so you can actually ward off the Decurions. They're not able to actually get any initial kills. Ninja possibly could have killed that one before these guys intercepted, but just didn't quite see it. He's just looking to try and heal this fella up a little bit more with his healing. So throwing axemen here for Kire, but at the same time it's a little bit rough. Without any throwing spears to shield and try and take out the Decurions fast, these guys can't really just focus down legionaries. who are there really designed to beat with their bonus towards the infantry. So raid there for Kire has not been as successful as the one by Neenja there, who's got a 3 vil lead at the moment. He's lacking in terms of vil production at the moment though, so he needs to gather a little bit more food. He's got both of his food upgrades at the moment, but he's also having to commit to farms that he doesn't have the upgrade for those. And now that there's some spears here for Kire, he should actually be able to pretty much snare lock one of these Decurions and focus it down, but he doesn't want to get too close. Neenja going to bring back his rest of his Decurions. Yeah, he's having to commit to plough early, so it's going to cost him a little bit of gold. A bit of wood to get enough farms to really justify taking the tech. He's got a good amount of stone to keep getting upgrades and also go for age 3 town centre. It's pretty important to keep adding your town centres where possible. Okay, with a nice unit mass at the moment. He hasn't actually got an armory yet. He's just got more production buildings over Neenja at the moment. In fact, he's got 6 barracks. He is adding that armory now. Ninja's already got temper, so he's got his age 2 melee damage upgrade, and he's going to add scale mail as well. It'll kick in before Kire's able to get either scale mail or temper, so he'll be down 2 upgrades briefly here. But population's actually favouring Kire at the moment. He's going to have a much bigger army population. He just needs to make sure the spears are really zoning out these Decurions, so he's doing a good job with that. Throwing Axeman picking off a good number of the legionaries here. Neenja managing to eventually get on the back line there. It looks like he should be able to clean this up, but he is slightly down in terms of production over Kire, so Kire's having to back off at the moment, but he's able to mass up units a lot quicker than his Roman opponent at the moment. Just sort of mumbled that. Temper's going to finish up now. Neenja committing to age 3, so he is actually adding more production alongside this, which is good, but at the same time, going to make sure he's able to keep smashing out enough units here. And Kire's not able to overwhelm him because Norse, once they're able to establish that nice 2 town centre or town centre dock eco, they're a really good bruiser civ in the early to mid game. Then again, Romans also are too, to an extent. Although if you lose the Decurions, it's a huge blow. But if you're able to keep them alive like Neenja has been able to, they do accrue a lot of value when they heal back up, because they're not a cheap cavalry unit. In fact, they used to be even more expensive, but have even more stats. So you can imagine just how valuable they were back then. This is nice timing here by Kire, even though he's got age 3 on the way, so he's sort of still waiting for that scale mail to kick in. He's able to deny that wall off by Neenja and force him to have to come and deal with this. So wood gatherer is going to get evacuated there. These houses are going to be under a bit of threat, or the armory, so if Neenja can snipe either of those, I mean, if Kire could snipe either of those, it'd be really painful for Neenja at the moment. He's not wanting to overextend into the throwing axeman. They don't actually get the benefit of snare with the Axe of Piercing Frost, but when they're kiting well, it honestly feels like it, they are. So Ninja's going for Siege Workshop, which is really handy because you have access to Scorpios, sorry, as the Romans. Well, Norse, gonna have to invest in cavalry to try and clean them up, ideally, because infantry and ranged don't really fight well against Scorpios, so a natural counter to infantry, and ranged just have small health pools and tend to just get out-traded by them. So Ninja doing his best to make sure the cavalry are taking roughly the same amount of damage there. They can get a good surround on the throwing axemen here, so this is going to rough fight for Kire overall, I think. The Ninja possibly could back off with the... Ooh, he's backing off with the legionaries rather than the Decurions, so I think that could be a bit of a costly blow for him. Ultimately, he's going to win this fight, but at the same time, I think he lost a Decurion and lost a bit more health off his other Decurions than he possibly had to there. Slightly down on population, 50 vils to 69 here for Kire, so Ninja's actually cut his villager production a little bit, which is not all that good. Kire's just been non-stop 2 town centre ville production. Although both our players have really only got 20 population space to play with, or 40 to play with, sorry, once they add their last 4 houses, or last 2 longhouses, before they've got to get age 3 town centres. So, yeah, you are sort of population capped by age in AOEO, because you're only able to build 24 houses, so that takes you up to 120 pop, and then you got 20 pop per town centre. So it sort of goes, you know, 140 pop max out in early age 2, or 160 pop in later age 2, 180 in age 3, and 200 in age 4. But again, you also have quite large armies, because infantry and ranged from the early game are typically only 1 population. And then civs like Norse, you've actually got 1 population cavalry and 0 population war dogs. I think Indians will also be a little bit the same, with most of their early game units being 1 or 0 population. I think their late game, maybe a bit like Norse in the fact that it also tends to ramp up in terms of the population space of your army. A little bit lucky there that Ulfs are only 1 pop. Wonderful unit against both ranged and cav. Really, they can be countered by late game military or siege. And then they're fast enough to get on top of siege. So 3 town centre here for Kire, so this is a nice spot for him. He probably wants to add those 2 longhouses as he gets close to 160 pop here. Yeah, so he can get up to 180. Neenja on 2 TC at the moment, can add the 3rd once he gets the resources for it. But he's maxed out at 140 pop at the moment. The player's going to engage. Neenja with both his H2 upgrades. Kire with even his ranged armor, which he possibly doesn't need at this point, because Scorpio is going to deal siege crush damage rather than your typical range damage, pierce. So overall, this is a nice fight for Kire here, because he's got that population lead going into it. He's able to dismantle Ninja's mid-game army here, and Neenja tapping out because he knows there'll be a forward fortress and then possibly another. And Kire's just going to try and shove with a ton of berserkers from there with their insane damage, which gives them a quick downtime for all these buildings. So GG, well played guys, but Kire taking the game. What does that? It's not centered. That's ugly, man. That's ugly.